I'm speaking in good faith with three guests from different faith traditions and, of course, with different life experiences today about the love of God. Kimberly Applewhite Teitter has her doctorate in psychology, is a licensed clinical psychologist, a published author, an adjunct professor, and an entrepreneur in the Salt Lake City area. She's also a wife and a mother to two daughters, and is the assistant director of the Deborah Bonner Unity Gospel Choir in Utah. Kimberly, thank you for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
Also in studio today, Rachel Whipple. She's an attorney and Provo City Councilor and a former research fellow at the International Center for Law and Religion Studies. She's also a member of the Provo Awakening Valley Sangha Board of Directors. Rachel, good to have you here today.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be with you.
And I'm glad your office is close enough that you could hop over because I know you're a very busy person with your work and being on a city council. Shahab Saeed is a business and community leader in Salt Lake City. He served as a trustee for Intermountain Healthcare System's corporate board and as a faculty member for the Institute for Healthcare Improvement and the American Hospital Association. And I know he had a great day skiing yesterday and the greatest powder on earth.
Yes, true, very true. I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you. Today we're talking about God's love. I have a couple of angles of this. Let's start with when I say God's love, what do you think of? How does that strike you, Rachel?
Yeah, so when we're coming at it from a Buddhist tradition, it's less about God and more about the love, about developing this sense of compassion and loving kindness. And this is a capacity that we all have within us. And we can cultivate that more and more so that we really embody it. And instead of necessarily having an external locus, like God is the embodiment of all of the love, we recognize that within each other. That said, there's the bodhisattva of compassion. So that's Avalokiteshvara or Kuan-Yin in the Chinese tradition. So if you need that kind of focal point, then there is an embodiment, just like you have a Catholic saint or somebody that you can look to as this example or to help focus your mind as you're trying to develop these attributes.
Makes sense. And that phrase, loving kindness, I have always liked.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, a metta meditation, so METTA is this loving kindness, where as you're doing this meditation, you have these well wishes for each other. May you be safe. May you be happy. May you be well. May you live with ease. And you repeat these phrases with different people in mind, starting with the people who are close to you that are easy to love. And you build this well of goodwill, of good feeling, and you expand out to the people you don't know so well, or to the people that you have difficult relationships with. And as you do this practice, you really are cultivating these good feelings.
I want to ask if this came naturally to you when you first started. Was that your personality?
It came more naturally to me than to my husband, right? Like, so this is something that I wanted, and the practice helps me develop those good attributes that, they can wither if you don't feed them. But it's amazing because as I do this practice, I find that it changes my actions, that I have more patience, that somebody says something and you have that instinctive reaction and judgment. And sometimes I've got a little pause before I react, and I can choose not to react harshly. Or I immediately jump to the conclusion and I'm like, oh, I have jumped to the conclusion. Let's step back from that.
So you're aware of it.
Yeah, it's really, really amazing. But, it's a slow incremental thing over time. But the nice thing about doing a metta meditation is that when you do it for that period, you feel good, and then you also get the cumulative effects of extended practice.
Nice. Shahab, did you grow up with a particular idea of what God's love was? Or has that developed over time? What is that for you?
It's probably developed over time, and I think what came to my mind was just this unconditional love in terms of what God's love is. I should mention that I'm a member of the Baha'i faith, so what I share is my perspective and my understanding of the Baha'i faith. And Baha'u'llah is the prophet founder of the Baha'i faith, and in one of his writings, which is called The Hidden Words, he says, O Son of Man, veiled in my immemorial being and in my ancient eternity of my essence, I knew my love for thee. Therefore I created thee. So we were created because of God's love. Have engraved on thee mine image and revealed to thee my beauty. So that unconditional love that applies to all of humanity.
Which really is one of the principles of the Baha'i faith.
Yes.
I have sensed that. I sort of feel like every time there's a little circle of people who disagree, we should call on someone from the Baha'i tradition to please come and lead us through the discussion.
That is nice of you to say.
Baha'is and Quakers, we're going to put you two in charge of working out everybody's differences.
Baha'is do try to look for points of unity, like you mentioned. And we have more in common than we have that differentiates us. And this God's love is, I think, the essence and the foundation. He doesn't say, I only like you or you. Yeah. God's love embodies everyone.
Thank you. How about you, Kimberly?
When I got the topic for today, I just thought about how needed it is. A friend had posted on social media, he's in his 30s to 40s, and was just talking about how sometimes it feels really difficult to feel God's love as you move through life. I think in the LDS tradition, at least the way that I've experienced it, there's a lot when you're a kid about like how God loves everyone and that he's aware of our circumstances and that we can communicate with him. And there's a lot in the teenage years that surround like receiving revelation and how you clear your mind and your heart to receive these things. And what my friend was saying was, you know, as you get older, sometimes it feels like you're left on your own. Like you've built all this capacity for revelation or building up good practice. And then sometimes it's like, okay, well, maybe I'm just being left to my own devices when the challenges of the world happened. And it's relatable to a lot of people, and it's relatable to me too. I think at this point in my life, I've had to be pretty intentional about how I look for God's love, not because it's not there, but because maybe I don't have the same intentionality or hopefulness that I did when I was a kid, or maybe there's just other circumstances that make it feel like it's more complicated. I was thinking about when you were talking, Rachel, about the loving kindness meditation. As a psychologist, we do like a version of that in dialectical behavior therapy, which borrows a lot from Eastern tradition. And it's interesting because in that version that we do, we also, like after people have cultivated all this feeling of goodwill, we are kind of like, okay, well, can you draw from that well of good feeling? Like, can you radiate that back? And that's when people really start to struggle, like their receptive capacity to feeling loving kindness is just shattered in some way. We get people that have just learned from the environment and circumstances that certain things just don't feel as accessible or possible anymore. And so it's not so much a struggle for them to give love, but to receive love is really difficult. And so even I think about in my tradition also people have this interest in gospel music, so our choir has been able to go out. And I think one of the ways that gospel music, I mean, I grew up on gospel music too. I'm Black in case, people are just listening and they can't see it. So I grew up on gospel music as well as the music of my faith tradition of origin. But what makes those two things different is often the perspective is different, who is talking. You know, a lot of LDS hymns come from like a Protestant Methodist tradition, like they're pretty regal, like God is grand and we respect him and that's great. Gospel music, especially in the Black traditions, is more like relational and sometimes you're speaking as God, sometimes you're speaking as yourself, but from just a place of power and positionality that's different. And it just seems like people are really hungry for a different understanding of that relationship that helps make that love feel more accessible.
Thank you, each of you. This is really fun to talk about. I mean, I can't believe we get to do this, and this is my work. But, I wonder if there are, you just mentioned hymns, different kinds of hymns, scriptures, prayers. You mentioned a particular prayer, Rachel. I wonder maybe if we could dig into that a little bit. Are there times when you've leaned on a particular scripture or a thought or a prayer that's been helpful for you in connecting with the divine?
There is a serenity, the Baha'i House of Worship in New Delhi, which is the shape of a lotus. And there is something that you feel in that calmness of spirit and being able to connect with the divine. And these houses of worship in the Baha'i faith, they have the design that they have doors on all sides, symbolizing welcoming all of humanity. My soul is uplifted every time in one of those spaces, reciting the Word of God and saying prayers.
So we have lots of little gathas or little practice kind of poems, things to help you. And they're the sutras and chants and everything. I really love the Heart Sutra. I found that just amazingly powerful, but it's too long for me to recite the whole thing for you right now. But one gatha that I do when we invite the bell at the end of the meeting is, may the sound of this bell penetrate deeply into the cosmos so that beings, even in those dark places, may hear it and be free from birth and death. May all beings realize awakening and find their way home. Namo Shakyamunae Buddhaya. But that idea that there's every being out there, and some of us are in dark places.
Right.
But this sound, this hope could penetrate, and somehow, you could have that insight. You could be free from your cycles of disappointment or expectation or frustration. And in a moment, you could be home. You could be grounded, right? And that could be, as Kierkegaard would say, like resting transparently, right? To be with God. But to have that point of stability and freedom, like that's what we want for ourselves and for everything. And so every time I say this gatha, and I do it every day, at least once a day, it breaks my heart open, right? Because I think that's what we all want, is to be home.
Yeah. A place where we belong, a place where we could be at peace, at rest.
Right. And I think part of it, it's a state of mind, it's an attitude thing, but I think it goes along with being seen, being loved, because that's the most important and terrifying thing to all of us, is to see and be seen, like really as we are, and to know that when we are seen, we are also loved as we are.
Thank you. Shahab, you did read that passage at the beginning about we were created from the beginning with the love of God. Anything more you want to say about the topic?
Yeah, this concept of the love of God, it really, Baha'u'llah, the prophet, founder of the Baha'i faith, these hidden words are very short passages, just like the one I read you. There's another one that always kind of uplifts me. This one is Hidden Words, number 29. He says, O Son of Bounty, out of the waste of nothingness, with the clay of my command, I made thee to appear, and have ordained for thy training every atom in existence and the essence of all created things. To have that such love that he created us and he put every atom in the universe for our training. And it gets to what Rachel was talking about in terms of ability to love and accept everyone just because of who they are.
Yeah.
And in another passage it says, Noble have I created thee. Rise then unto that for which thou wast created. And when I think about that and trying to see the nobility in all, even in those instances where the reaction is, it's not very noble. You know what I mean? To take a step back.
Yeah.
To kind of calm that ego.
Yeah.
To say, this is somebody that the Lord loves. So there must be something I'm not understanding.
And the purpose behind, when you talked about the intentionality of like every atom, every particle, I mean, that makes me think, well, I might even have more purpose than I'm aware of.
Absolutely.
And be open to that.
Yeah, that potential that's there. If he says, Noble have I created thee, what are the potentialities there in terms of what we could achieve in terms of, and in the Baha'i faith, we believe that we are spiritual beings, not material beings. And I think everybody around the table probably agrees with that we are here to develop spiritual qualities as we move on to the next worlds of God. So it is not easy, at times, to control the ego and take a step back. But this is what Baha'is try to do. And I try. Not successfully all the time, but I do try.
Good. Any comment from you, Kimberly?
Yeah, I just love hearing y'all talk about creation and knowing and how much comfort there is in that. I think that I resonate with pretty similar things, stuff like, before I formed thee in the belly, I knew thee. I really like this idea of being known before. It's interesting as I watch my own kids grow that, some of what they're doing I can recognize because it's stuff I did when I was a kid, just like the ways that I would react to things. And then so much, the vast majority of what they do is just stuff that I could predict just from watching them as kids. And maybe this is just me as a child development person, but just so much of who they are seems so unique and but also predictable from what I've seen of them. And it's really fascinating for me as a parent to feel like I can know my kids in this way. And so to have somebody with perfect knowledge be able to know us in similar ways just gives me a lot of comfort. I also, in the LDS tradition, we have Pearl of Great Price, which, I don't know, it's like a prequel. I don't know how you describe it. It's like Lion King 1.5. I don't know. So it's like a different
This is
view
interesting. I want to hear this.
I feel like it's accurate. So it's like a view of the events of around the time of Noah and the flood, looking at how Enoch, the prophet Enoch, would have conversed with the Lord at that time. And so in those set of scriptures, it talks about, I think in the LDS tradition, we really like Enoch because he set up this community, Zion, where everybody was nice to each other. In essence, they were one heart, one mind. They dwelt in righteousness. There was no poor among them. We say that we value these things. Again, in practice, does it happen? I don't know. But we say that we value it, and so that's nice. So anyway, Enoch had this Zion community. They got taken up into heaven, and so the set of scriptures talks about what Enoch might have seen being in heaven with the Lord. Because it was right around the time of Noah and the flood, it's like Enoch's looking at all the creations and just feeling in awe. And the Lord is like, but look at these, my children down here. They're doing all this stuff. They don't believe in me. They're not treating each other kindly. And the Lord is crying. And Enoch is like, how is it that you can cry? You created all of this stuff. What's the deal? And the Lord's response is that I want my children to be kind to each other, in essence. I want them to feel the love that I have for them. They're down there doing all of this stuff. And when Enoch saw that, it says his heart swelled as wide as eternity. And so looking at the people that God loves can help us feel that love. And, in the LDS tradition, eternity is one of the names that we use for the divine. So to think that our hearts can be divine hearts can be like the Lord's as we look on creation and see just that, the infinite nature of the love that God has for us is something that really resonates with me.
On In Good Faith today, we're talking about the love of God, and we'll be back with more in just a minute. We're back today in studio with Kimberly Applewhite Teitter, with Rachel Whipple and Shahab Saeed, talking about God's love. And I remember one time I was in a discussion, probably a Sunday school class, something like that, and talking about the love of God, that God loves everyone. And the teacher said, "Do you love God?" And I thought, I don't know if I really thought about, do I love God? And if we ask God, do you think Steve loves you? Would God say, well, the evidence suggests that he hasn't thought much about you. But it really made me think, and I thought, I should be aware of this. And I really tried to be aware of, instead of just taking for granted the good things in my life and saying, thank you for this, aren't we lucky that this? but to see those as things that I would feel love for the person who would give them to me. And that was a very important moment, I think, in my life, was to kind of think of the other half of that equation, like maybe this should call forth something from me. And I'm just wondering if any of you have stories about whether God, loving kindness, whatever it might be, that you felt like you were changed somehow or taught something or improved in some way because of that awareness.
Yeah, I love what you said about Enoch and the heart being swelled wide as eternity with all of this love. I like 1 John 3:2, right, where it's talking about when Christ shall appear, we shall be like him, and we will see him as he is. I think to be like Christ, to have these attributes, is related to how we see each other. So when I was an undergrad, I was in a biblical Hebrew class, and there's this one kid in there who was like the most annoying guy I've ever met. He was one of these kids who always had to like say the right answer and insert himself and nitpick everybody else's answer. And he was really annoying, right? He was annoying, and you could tell that he annoyed everybody in the room, right? Because everybody reacted to that.
Uh-huh.
And I certainly was annoyed. But
I'm feeling it.
And he was also trying so hard, right? And the more he tried, the more annoying he was. And people started being mean to him, and, just little ways, those little slights and things that you do, throwing shade. So one day he was in class, and he was talking about his birthday, and that he was going to have a party, and it was going to be this next night. And I realized nobody was going to this kid's birthday. Nobody was there. Mm-hmm. And it broke my heart open. This kind of flash of insight, this grace that was just this vision of this kid. And I saw him as somebody who desperately wanted to be loved and didn't know how to do that, and didn't know that he was pushing people away, and he wasn't annoying to me anymore. And I changed how I treated him. Like, I didn't go out with him or anything, but I talked to him, I looked at him and spoke with him, and suddenly having somebody see him and connect with him, his annoying mannerisms toned down. And because I was treating him differently, other people in the class treated him differently. And the tone for the rest of the semester was different. And that flash of grace was not something I asked for. It was not something that I could manufacture on my own, because it's very hard to change the way you feel about people. Mm-hmm. But you can cultivate conditions. And when that insight, which we'd call prana, when that comes, you can act on it. And yeah, that experience happened to me when I was, probably 19 or 20. But it has stayed with me, and it has made me more hesitant to judge people harshly, especially when they're annoying me. Because I'm like, what are they asking for? What are they needing?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that was a very humbling experience. But that's what humility is right? Being open to learning and to saying, I was wrong about this, but we can be better.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just really appreciated hearing about that. One of my clients, or patients, whatever I'm supposed to call them, anyway, a person I know, when we were talking about the differences between how validation versus invalidation feels in the body, she said invalidation feels like being a crying child inside, left in a room and not knowing where your next care is coming from. And so much of what people do when they don't know how people are going to receive them is that crying child stuff, things that, a parent, it pulls on the heartstrings, but, when it's somebody else's child, it doesn't quite hit that way. And so I'm also grateful for just these moments where the Lord allows us to feel how much love that he has for his children. Because I think, there's a lot in our tradition about, is love unconditional? Is it conditional? Whatever. And there are, I think, situations that can make it harder to feel love or easier to feel love or whatever. But I tend to be on the side of like, God can do anything that he, she, they wants to do. And so much of the barrier is human stuff. Like, how often does God depend on people to deliver God's love? And the people don't do it. And so I try to be open because I never know when the person that the Lord is counting on is me, and like it, I don't do it. I'm from the South, and so it's just a colloquial thing to be like, oh, bless their heart. Like, when you really don't like what they have done. And possibly if you don't have any respect or desire to connect with this person at all. And I can remember also being in college, and there was somebody, I have a friend and I talk about this often, like, we just weren't ready for her brand of, like, how she practiced her faith, and now I think we've all gotten there, but, like, at the time, it was just, Bushmans and feminism and just, I don't know, all this stuff that we just did not understand, and so we would talk about just things that happened with this person, and I started saying this person's name and child of God. I'm like, this person, that child of God, and I did it every time I talked about them, and the more I did that, the less I could do it with irreverence, because it was true, right? This person was a child of God, and if I saw them that way, then I would see their needs as being valuable and what they were communicating as being something that I could pay attention to, regardless of whether I understood it. So I remember that slow turning where God's like, okay, if you're going to put me in it, then I'm going to show you something. I guess one of the things I often talk about is being a young teenager growing up in the South. I, quote unquote, did not know any gay people at the age of 13 because there were none, of course. There's air quotes. Weren't any. And I remember reading in a teen magazine or something like that about a high school that was being set up in New York City, and it's still there, that was set up to make safe spaces for the LGBTQ population. So at the time, I'm like, never been to New York City, hadn't even thought about New York City. Like, I was a small town girl. And like I said, I didn't know any gay people personally, but I just remember reading that and being like, yeah, like everybody needs safe space. And so much of what I felt, for one, has carried with me, and for two, like you're saying, Rachel, just did not feel like it came from me, because there wasn't any way that I would have generated this reaction on my own. So I see when you talk about like feeling called into these things, like feeling called into love, because that's very much what it felt like for me. And I've tried to stay true to that through my life, because again, like, what if I'm the one? Like, I don't want to be caught slipping. I know that the Lord can do whatever he wants, but like, what if I'm the one that is supposed to give this love to someone?
Yeah.
Steve, you asked the question, do you love God? Somebody asked you that. And when you asked that, this phrase came to mind, again from Baha'u'llah's writings, where he says, love me that I may love thee. If thou lovest me not, my love in no wise can reach thee. So being trained as an engineer, that kind of like, okay, the circuit has to be closed. So I have to do something to close the circuit in terms of that God's love. And just like you explained, there are times when I think that God's love comes to our assistance, just like you were saying, Rachel, in terms of how you started treating this new individual, and other times where we are supposed to be. I remember my example, the story is from long ago as well. This was right after the revolution took place in Iran, and members of the Baha'i faith were being heavily persecuted. And I was on a panel discussion at the University of Utah, and we were talking about that, and there were some students who were very attached to the revolution and so on. And we were talking about the human rights and how religious freedom and Baha'is were being executed in Iran just for their belief. In fact, this year we are commemorating 40th anniversary of these women in city of Shiraz that were hung because they were Baha'is and they were teaching children's classes. And a question came up and I answered it. And then afterwards I was going, where did that come from? That's not something that I had thought about and that to me is an example of that connection between the Lord, that He is there to help us to try to do the right thing. And it's this divine assistance and love of God can come in many different forms. And then going back to Kimberly, you were talking about kids and how you can see how they were all different in terms of this nobility. One of the things that I feel like you develop as you go through life is now, if you think it's fun with kids, just wait till you have grandkids. And it's seeing how different they are. And I guess maybe as we grow older, we develop this capacity to be able to notice these gifts that the Lord has given to the grandkids and that, intense love that we have for them without full responsibility.
That's true. Okay, so a question I've been dying to ask a member of the city council, and here you are.
Oh, all right.
There are a few times when, I want you to sort of keep this hat on for a minute, where I thought, I'd like to get more involved. And then I see at meetings how the representatives are treated and spoken to and dismissed. And people sometimes seem to be at their worst, even if we're talking about, the slight property tax increase or whatever it is they disagree with. And they immediately go to, well, you're a horrible person. Don't expect me to vote.
You're not talking about Provo City Council meetings.
No.
Sure, it would never happen
surely
here.
Never happens there.
Actually,
right?
we've been really respectful and collegial in ours, and I feel incredibly fortunate to be on councils that have that level of respect amongst ourselves and for our staff and for the people who come to petition us. But I have seen other meetings in different jurisdictions where there's horrible, embattled animosity on everyone's part, right? People coming up and yelling at the councilors and the councilors reacting in terrible ways as well. So I think that's probably what you're talking about.
Yeah, but I'm wondering if someone can respond as you talked, if even in a situation like that, you can have that little space to react. Do you see it diffuse or calm down people? Like they yell, and if someone doesn't respond in kind, but seems to be, okay, I think this is what you're saying, and respond with loving kindness or the love of God. Do you see that changing the behavior of the people who are there to respond?
Yeah, and I've seen this in some of my email correspondence with constituents. Sometimes they'll get all head up over a particular issue, and how I respond to that can completely change it. Especially if they're approaching where they've been fed a little bit of information and a call to action. And so they blast off usually a form email with a couple of things added to it.
Right.
And then if I respond to say, I've heard you, and ask them more questions like, why does this concern you? How does this affect you? Help me understand your position. Then the next email I get from them, the tone is completely changed, and we can start a dialogue. That doesn't always work. Some people will double down in their fear and hatred, and there's no productive conversation. But giving a chance is really important. One thing that's really been helpful for me, both on the council and as an attorney, is the practice of deep listening that Thich Nhat Hanh talked about a lot, where you are there present with the person and you listen to what they say, which is an extraordinarily difficult thing for us to do, right? Because usually we're formulating our answer or a rebuttal or, thinking about the next thing instead of being present and hearing what's being said and what's not being said, right? Like the emotion and everything that's being conveyed by that. But if you can take the time to actually listen to a person and then pause before you answer and ask for that time. Say, okay, I'm still thinking about this. I'm processing and I want to understand better. That changes everything. Because this goes back to the fundamental need to be seen and to be heard. And what's amazing is when you listen, you learn things. Right?
Who
And
knew?
who knew? Who knew? But if you've already got the answers, then there's nothing to learn. There's no collaboration. There's no compromise. There's no moving forward. There's only embattlement. So it's been a fantastic practice, and I've been really working to try to cultivate this.
That's great. This is In Good Faith, where we are solving the major problems of the world right now through the love of God. Why not? And we'll be back with more in just a moment. Thank you for tuning in to In Good Faith. Today I'm in studio with Shahab Saeed, Rachel Whipple, and Kimberly Applewhite Teitter, talking about God's love. I'm wondering, and we've hinted at this a little bit, about how you see to really experience God's love. Let me restate it this way. It seems like you could experience God's love one-to-one in meditation or prayer. But I did hear a recent guest discuss leaving the faith tradition she grew up in because she said she saw a lot of, quote, seeking solitary self-improvement by withdrawing from the community and society, which wasn't to her, answering the needs of the community. And I'm wondering, maybe we can talk specifically about our spiritual communities. Do we need that community to really experience and to know God's love, or to have a way to channel it or to share it? Is that a requirement? Is that part of it, that we have a community to experience that with?
My philosophy tends to be, you do things, you learn things. And so when you look at communities, I think there's a lot of great potential, I guess, for what communities can do when you have people, places, things in alignment with what is important values-wise, and they have, again, an intentionality of moving along that direction, then I think a lot of good can be done that way. And I think that sometimes there's just a lot of other things that communities can get into. I did my doctoral research project on the experiences of LGBTQ people in conservative religious faiths, most of them my own. And a lot of them talked about how when they went to their bishops, their ecclesiastical leaders, to disclose their gayness themselves, reveal themselves to people, I keep thinking about how we really all talked about how important it is to be like seen and known and held. I would extend that. And so I think that that's all people are looking for when they do these things. And a lot of what they were reporting happened was that people were trying to, let's say, regulate their behavior in order to have them be a part of a community. And that, to me, is where I struggle with community sometimes, especially my own religious tradition, because I'm like, I think that God can reach people anywhere they go. But we've got a lot of fear around. And of course, like, it makes sense, right? Like, we're a group of people. So much of a part of the narrative is how we got kicked out place to place because people didn't like us. And like, the bigger they grew, the more people hated. And, I can remember being a kid and being like, there's still a law in the books in Missouri or wherever it is that you can like shoot a Mormon on the spot. So like, there's just this persecution narrative that I'm not saying is not real. I get it. If you felt like you had to go all the way to Mexico to get people not to bother you, like, there's something there, right? And so in the tradition, there's this pattern of preserving community at all costs that sometimes I think the love is left out. And then when you take that kind of behavior and put it on an individual level, I think sometimes that values connectedness or like just tuning into this larger purpose of bringing everybody home gets lost because there's so many check boxes that we can like for sure grab onto and still be a part of the community, that sometimes we lose the spirit and the values behind why we're doing that stuff. We love community.
We do. And I think, the whole purpose of the faith is improving the life of the community for everyone involved. But the guest that you mentioned maybe needed a break. There's this analogy that we talked about being spiritual beings, but we live in a material world. So in the Baha'i writings, it talks about that there's the horse and the rider. Our material being is the horse, and the rider is the spiritual being. So sometimes if the horse is tired, maybe it does need a little time to go and reflect, but then to come back with the rider guiding it back into the life of society. And we need more leaders like Rachel who have this humble posture of learning, that even when somebody is rude, she's willing to step back and say, what can I learn from this person? What is it that the issue that they're bringing up? And truly, this humble posture of learning becomes critical as we try to advance and make everyone's life better in our community. So I think the engagement with the community is not just within our own faith communities, but community as large, serving as a public servant, teaching, leading the choir. So I think it is really important to, in the Baha'i writings, it says, let deeds, not words, be your adorning. And if we're not involved in the life of society and social discourse, we're not really moving towards improvement and making everyone's life better. One of the questions that you had sent was, when you're unmotivated to work and do the Lord's work, which is loving humanity and improving life for everyone, what do you do? And I thought about that a lot, and it was like, okay, take a break, the horse is tired, take a break, and then surround yourself with people who bring you joy. Because in the Baha'i writings, it says, joy gives us wings, and we can fly. And there are people who just make you laugh and are optimistic. And so those are some of the things that I do.
That's why I invited you to be here, because you are one of those people.
Baha'i people are already going to change. What are all the things? You were making a list of the things Baha'i faith's going to solve. See, evidence.
It's the Lord's grace and Lord's love that's surrounding us all.
That's right.
At one time, I spent time thinking about, do I experience God's love? I think I sort of assumed it because I had been taught it. But then when I spent time thinking, am I experiencing that? And I think the closest to an answer I got was how I felt about people, just if I could be vulnerable here for a moment, since that's what we do in our show. I think one of my gifts is teaching. And in my community, I've often been asked to be a teacher. And part of the joy was, what do we need to talk about in this group that I'm quote unquote teaching, but really it's a discussion. And what I feel for the people that I'm teaching, to me, is God's love. And when we are working on that together, I feel something communally. I almost feel something coming through me. And like you said, Shahab, we'll end and I think, that's not what I prepared. Where did that come from?
Yeah.
But it was in this sort of flow of what I come to call God's love for all the people present. And I think we're all different. And for me, maybe that's one of the ways, and maybe that's God saying, you should do a little more of this. Have you noticed this is a good experience for you, for the people you're with? And not so much just sitting around twiddling your thumb or whatever it might be. So we're almost out of time. I'd like to talk for another hour on this. But if you have final thoughts about God's love, how you experience it, I would love to finish with those.
Well, I guess I feel that love every day and have made a habit of thanking the Lord for that love and grace. And I think about my African-American friends who say, God is good.
All the time.
There you See how quickly that came?
Yeah.
God is good all the time. And this came from my brothers and sisters who were subject to slavery.
Right.
Who could say God is good all the time while under oppression. Could there be anything more noble than that? So if we're open to it, if that chant, love me that I may love thee, that love just is surrounding us all the time, is just being cognizant and not letting the horse take over. So when you get a bad email and, you're just like, oh, let me show you this, the horse can kick right back, right? As opposed to the writer saying, whoa, they didn't mean it. And I have had similar experiences where if you just step back and, and especially in these days of texts and emails, somebody was texting me and they responded really harshly. And I said, this is why I wanted to talk to you, because I think texting can come across as disrespectful. And I didn't mean that at all. And the next response, Rachel, the tone totally changed.
Yeah, I really liked what you said, Tiffany, about the barrier to God's love is human stuff. You know, in my tradition, that would be delusion, right? You know, these expectations or stories that we impose on other people. That's the barrier to feeling that love in all ways. And I'm just really grateful for this practice that is an engaged Buddhism, where through your meditation, you're developing self-observation and self-restraint and also this loving kindness. And you do that in the context of your community, in your Sangha. And we have all of these overlapping communities that we're part of. And all of them are opportunities for these interactions and for these relationships to grow. And they're not all good. Some of them are frustrating, and those challenge us and help us to develop these good capacities that we want, you know, to develop that sense of love within ourselves and love for other people.
Thank you very much.
I just wanted to share one of my favorite passages about God's love. I think I just experienced God's love as like weightlessness or like just weird suspended groundedness in DBT tradition, which I'm sure we borrowed from like a million other people. There's this concept of wise mind, and one of the things that Dr. Linehan talks about is like being a stone flake on a lake. And I'm like, what is a stone flake? But just like a little piece of stone that floats and like the water's all around and it doesn't move too fast, too slow. It's just like the right. And then that's kind of how I feel when I think about God and his love for me. In the Book of Mormon, there's a passage of scripture that people sometimes refer to as Nephi's Psalm, and it happens after Nephi's father passes away, and he's going through it, and he says he knows in whom he has trusted. And then he says, my God hath been my support. He hath led me through mine afflictions in the wilderness, and he hath preserved me upon the waters of the great deep. He hath filled me with his love, even into the consuming of my flesh. He hath confounded mine enemies into the causing of them to quake before me. And upon the wings of his spirit hath my body been carried away upon exceedingly high mountains. And mine eyes have beheld great things, yea, even too great for man. Oh, then, if I have seen so great things, if the Lord in his condescension unto the children of men hath visited men in so much mercy, why should my heart weep and my soul linger in the valley of sorrow? And I just think that God carries me through the things that I experience in this life and gives me so much hope in what's to come that I just resonate with, like, why would my heart droop in this, like, stuff? Like, God is who is keeping me afloat here. And that's saying something because I can't swim. And so it's like a very, like, I don't even relate to water as a metaphor to just break the ice there. But that's how I experience it, oddly enough.
You know, Rachel was saying earlier that she's learned to ski and so on. And I was thinking about God's love, and I'm thinking, oh, man, that's kind of like skiing in powder. Waist deep and floating down this majestic mountain. It's just, and you're surrounded, you're immersed.
Oh, that's a beautiful image. Kimberly, Rachel, Shahab, thank you, each of you. This has been delightful to me. My whole day is going to be better because of this discussion. So thanks for kicking it off this way.
Likewise, Steve. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This episode was produced by Heather Bigley. Our production team includes Leah King, Katarina Martinich, Josh Orton, and Ashton Rowan. Our post-production sound designers are Mark Hansen, Daniel Phillips, and Carly Wilson. In Good Faith is committed to the idea that we all benefit from hearing people of widely varying backgrounds share their personal experience with faith and belief. In fact, we think people with such experience deserve some of our best listening. We'd love you to spread the word about In Good Faith. Any episode you listen to, you can easily share with a friend, and be sure and leave a comment or review at YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts. Find us on Twitter at In Good Faith Pod, on Instagram and Facebook, In Good Faith Podcast. On YouTube, youtube.com/@in-good-faith. In Good Faith is a production of BYU Radio. I'm Stephen Cap Perry. I hope you'll join me again soon, right here in Good Faith.